Hi, I'm Joe Connolly. We are going to hear about probably the most important business topic right now, the future of Manhattan's office towers and business districts. Our guest is Scott Rechler of RXR, which owns and operates many of the cities and the suburbs' premier office buildings. Scott advises the New York Federal Reserve on economic decisions and the impact of them. He's been on the boards of the Port Authority and the MTA. Gridlock Sam Schwartz, says Scott is not just another developer looking to score big. He really cares about the city. And that is quite a testimonial. Scott, is it correct to assume that many of the city's largest office towers are going to have a lot of empty space in them for the foreseeable future?
Joe, for someone who loves this city, I hope the answer is no, right? Because what drives this city's vibrancy and vitality is our midtown districts and the office buildings that are here, right? And they come when the people come that work in these office buildings, they support the restaurants, they support the small businesses, and really what the key ingredient to New York City's success is talent, right? Talent from the around the world, the best and brightest come to New York. They're the most creative, they're the most diverse, and then companies locate here to be able to capitalize on that expertise to grow their businesses. Now, though, to be specific, there are going to be some office buildings that are going to sit vacant for a very long time because what's happened is in this post COVID world, people's view of what you use the office for has changed. And buildings that can provide the highest level of experience and engagement and what we call third spaces where people can collaborate and bond and become parts of broader communities will actually thrive. But buildings that are more commodity like class B buildings, class C buildings that aren't close to public transit, frankly, are going to become obsolete. And so there will be a divergence between the haves and have nots of office buildings that's going to have to be dealt with to ensure the long-term sustainable economic vitality of the city.
Right, there'll really be two classes of office tower. How about in the boroughs outside of Manhattan? Do you think that we will see a lot more occupancy and new business towers opening up even outside of Manhattan, Scott?
Yeah, I think one of the things that COVID accelerated was us looking at New York more through a regional lens and not just Manhattan centric. You go back historically, Manhattan would thrive, and the boroughs and the suburbs would suffer, or the boroughs and the suburbs would do well, and Manhattan would suffer. I think in this case, you really need to have both the boroughs, the suburbs, everyone do well. We talk a lot about Manhattan being a superstar city. Really, for it to be sustainable, it needs to be a superstar region. And that will enable us to deal with some of the big challenges we have, like affordability of housing or the capacity of our transit systems or the congestion on our roads. If people can work more closer to where they live and they can live at places that's more affordable and have quality of lives that are more affordable in terms of education and other types of quality of life. So I do think you're going to see more of a regional recovery than we've seen ever before in New York.
Interesting. And from your perspective, what is the difference in business and office commercial development between the suburbs, the actual suburbs, and the city and the boroughs? Are they different to your view, or is it how so?
Yeah, I think they are different, and each suburb has its own different niche of business, right? There's when you think about the suburbs, they're either the office user are one or two types of companies. They're either service companies that are supporting the people that live in that suburbs. Think, local regional banks or insurance companies that are supporting them, or they're regional outpost for New York City, um, the companies that want to have spots that are closer to where people live, both for affordability and convenience. So you see a number of banks, for example, have opened up offices in New Jersey, right, and or some of the pharmaceutical companies, and the same thing we're seeing in Nassau County. So where there's not too much distance, and one of our great assets that we have in New York is we have an extraordinary the commuter transit system, and whether it's the Long Island Railroad or Metro North, And we continue to invest in that, right? I mean, as we're going to open up East Side Access and have a whole nother round of capacity under Grand Central, that's going to enable Long Islanders to have another 150,000 commuters come into Midtown versus the West Side and Penn Station. And so there's going to be more and more of that. So I think we can leverage that, and that will enhance not only Manhattan, but enhance our suburbs as well.
Just one more question before we hear from Neil A. Carousso, producer, with some questions. It's interesting you say that about the suburbs, because I've been waiting to read about office parks becoming repopulated or new office towers going up in the suburbs. You say that some of these, quote, satellite offices are being opened. Are they in existing buildings? Tell us more about that in the suburbs.
Yeah, so you've seen existing buildings that have been leased. So, a lot of the banks, for example, in Jersey City have put outposts in Jersey City. In Long Island, we have a number of banks and insurance companies that are occupying our office buildings, but then have outposts or headquarters in New York City, right? And I think as you think about hybrid work and how the world's going to change as we go forward, and people maybe are working 3 days a week in the main office, or you're bringing convening days together, you can have more of a distributed workforce, and that will enable people to live closer to home and have a shorter commute for part of the week or the whole week, depending where they are, but still be able to convene in New York City with all their peers, where you can focus on culture building, ideation, collaboration that you can't get if everyone's working independently.
Neil.
Joe and Scott, great to see you again. When we spoke to you last time, really this time last year, you noted that it would be this multi-use, these multi-use buildings would be the key to competing in a post-pandemic world. Do you still subscribe to that philosophy? And also, have any of these conversions begun?
Yeah, Neil, good point. And I think it's even more than the buildings themselves. I think you really need to think about multi-use communities to be able to thrive in the post-pandemic world. So if you think about Midtown, for example, if people are working remotely and they're 3 days a week in the office, that means that you have to have people also living here to support the local restaurants, to support the local stores and businesses that are here. And so I think really we need to reimagine our central business district hubs to be live, work, play environments, so they can be 24/7 ecosystems. And not just rely on the commercial buildings. And, we have examples of that, right? Post 9/11, that happened in Lower Manhattan, where Lower Manhattan really used to be a 9 to 5, mostly underground community, when people would come in by train and then leave, and it would be empty during the evenings and weekends. And now it's thriving with families that live there, parks, restaurants, entertainment. And so I think we need to start making that shift. That's going to require us to actually start looking at some of the older office buildings, the older hotels that are located in Midtown, and converting them to housing and other alternative uses that help create that ecosystem.
Yeah, Joe and I heard from several, officials in Brooklyn about the growth of downtown Brooklyn. I actually saw that firsthand last week, and you can see, people are living and they're working there, and so it's a really booming neighborhood. But then when you look at Manhattan, are you concerned that Manhattan has changed, and can it recover?
Listen, I'm a big believer that Manhattan and New York City can reinvent itself. It's done it, for the last number of decades and generations. That when we hit a challenge, we come out of the way to be innovative and build back better and stronger. But it's not going to happen naturally if there's not good policies that are put in place to help accelerate that change. Again, with Lower Manhattan as a good example, there was zoning changes, tax incentives put in place to help the private sector lead the way on transforming old office buildings into residential buildings and creating that ecosystem that I spoke about. I think the same thing is going to be needed in Midtown. This could be a 10 to 20 year painful process where we have vacant buildings that were once assets to our communities now will be liabilities, unless we put policies in place that streamline the approval process to convert these buildings and provide economic incentives to help facilitate that. And if we can do that, we could take that 10 to 20 year period and bring it down to a 5 to 10 year period.
It sounds like you're a little optimistic than some were a year ago about the feasibility of converting some of these buildings to residential.
Yes, no, absolutely, Joe. And we're ourselves working on multiple projects within our existing portfolio of buildings that we think will be better as a residential property than an office building today, right? That have the character, that have the location, have the type of floor sizes and infrastructure that we can actually make that conversion work and be a good complement to the community at large. The other thing I will say is that in this past year, and we talked about this a little bit a year ago, the talent has come back. If you look at our multifamily portfolio, we have 10,000 units of multifamily. We're 99% occupied. Our rents are 10, 20% higher than where they were in the pre-COVID world. So the people are here. And so why am I optimistic? I'm optimistic because the people is the fuel that drives the long-term vitality of this economy, and they've come back. So now our job needs to be twofold. One, make sure they can afford to be here by having more housing, and two, make sure that we provide office environments that are compelling and magnetic, so they want to come back to the office, so they want to be with their peers, so they want to be with their friends, and so they want to stick with the companies that they're with. And I'll say, this is coming off of Labor Day, and there's been a lot of talk about Labor Day being a pivotal moment. I will say that just in our lobbies, I've seen more activity in the last 2 days in the mornings than I've seen anytime since COVID started. Even this morning when I was taking the elevator up to our office, I'm on the 14th floor. I had 4 stops on floors I've never seen stop in the last 2 years, right? So I think we're seeing this tug of war between the C-suite and the employee start to pivot, where the C-suite now is saying, I want you back at work, and people are coming back to work. And part of that is, we're over the worst of the public health crisis. And part of it is we're facing now an economic environment that has made it more challenging and more concerning for people, the workers, in terms of them being able to keep their jobs, and companies more concerned about their performance. And so it's all hands on deck. When you had free money and the economy was surging, you can get away with a little bit of lax, collaboration. Now we need everyone working together to make sure we're performing and executing at full bore.
But I'm still struck that so many of them outside of the big banks are saying come back 3 days a week. I can't imagine that those of you in the real estate business ever dreamt of such a thing before 2.5 years ago. The concept. 3 days a week.
I do think that hybrid work is here to stay, right? I think, again, and I think we have to be realistic about this, right? When you look at the benefit of technology, it enables us to create a life-work balance that didn't exist before, right? That if someone had to take care of the kids or deal with something at home, they have that flexibility today to do that, or they don't want to take that long commute 5 days a week. They have that flexibility to do that. The reality is the tenants of ours that are in this 3-day a week or 4-day a week hybrid work environment, they're not shrinking their space, because the people that come to the office, frankly, they want their own office, right? They want an environment where they have meeting spaces. They want, a level of amenity. So, they need to make it as compelling as possible. So that's really not a negative for the real estate industry, where, again, the challenge for the real estate industry is if you own buildings that are not, competitive, that don't have the amenities, that don't have the meeting spaces, that don't have the health and wellness spaces, that don't have the neighborhoods that are energizing and compelling and are easy accessible by public transit, you have a problem on your hands. And I remember last year I mentioned the analogy to malls, right? When e-commerce came through, right, Joe, if you wanted to buy something, you could go right to Amazon or another e-commerce site and buy it, and you wouldn't go to the mall. But you'd go to the mall if you were going to go there and be entertained, and it was something that was engaging. The office building needs to be the same way. And so the owners like ourselves are investing heavily in the buildings that we think meet those qualifications, and the ones that don't, we have to be realistic about and think about what's the alternative use. A good example is this 5 Times Square we announced yesterday. We just did a $1.3 billion refinancing of 5 Times Square. We leased 250,000 feet to Roku, a fast-growing tech company, and we put $300 million more money into that building to put the amenities in to make it a 21st century building, because we think it will be competitive in a post-COVID world. We won't do that with every building.
Wow, Neil.
Yeah, you know, Joe's been reporting, Scott, about people actually wanting to go in voluntarily to work when given the option to work remotely or in person, and that's a fascinating development too. And I know Joe and I, both enjoy getting back in the office, at least in a hybrid schedule too. Let me ask you about new tenants, if you're seeing any on the corporate level. What new industries are coming into Manhattan? Do you have any insight on that?
And we're seeing a lot of tenants. We have 2 million square feet of leases that we're in different phases of negotiating right now in our 25 million foot portfolio, right? And so it's active. If you look at the market overall, it's been more active the last 2-3 months than it's been since COVID hit. Now, I think we have to also watch the economic situation to see if the general economic condition slows that down. But what you are seeing are a lot of companies, whether that's law firms, financial service firms, or tech companies, really moving what we call the flight to quality, right? Moving from the buildings that are not meeting that post-COVID, competitive advantage that I spoke about before, to the better buildings. And they're looking at this as an opportunity to not only do it to make sure they can have the best space to bring their employees back to, but it's also a good, smart business decision because rents are lower, because the market's weaker, right? So we're seeing a lot of activity from those companies. The smart ones are being strategic and realizing this is what needs to get done. I mean, again, look at Google, right? They opened up at our Pier 57. They're building the St. John's building in Manhattan. They're not investing all this money because they don't plan on bringing people back to the office. They plan on bringing people back to the office.
Scott, your answers and the situation that you described reminds me of why I think business news is so interesting, because of the way that people like you see opportunities everywhere and then build them out. And we certainly all hope that you're right on the money with the way that you believe that Manhattan and the rest of the area will do well and will be better. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Neil. Good speaking with you both.